Good evening. I'm Jim Zirin, and you are watching The Digital Age. The American Museum of Natural History is a New York treasure. The museum was founded some 140 years ago by a public-spirited group of New Yorkers, which included none other than J.P. Morgan and the father of Theodore Roosevelt. Long the site of extraordinary exhibitions of iconic dinosaurs and fossils and stuffed animals, the museum has morphed into a teaching institution, and it is a digital powerhouse. The museum is among the most visited museums in the world. And here today to tell us about the remarkable evolution of the American Museum of Natural History is its remarkable president, Ellen Futter. Ellen, we are delighted to have you with us. Now, you've been at the helm for 2 decades.
Nearly.
Nearly. What a great ride it's been, and I congratulate you on all you've accomplished.
Thank you very much.
So why don't you tell us about your sense of the mission of the museum and how it may have changed?
Well, you know, actually, I think it's changed less than might be perceived. What's really changed is how we interpret it. It's always been and was founded as an institution of science and education. In fact, we were chartered as an educational institution, though I think actually they put it rather charmingly, and instead of calling it education, it was popular instruction, which was the term of the day. And really the change is in how we have come to integrate the mission of science and education, which once existed, I think, more side by side, and now are fully leveraged together, along, of course, with exhibition.
So you don't sense a mission creep?
We don't sense a mission creep, but what we have done is modernized how we really take that mission and extend its reach. You mentioned digital. I mean, there's so many different ways to take the mission. And when you think about what we do, we have 200 scientists on site, collections of 32 million specimens and artifacts. And our scientists are going out all over the world every year, over 100 field expeditions, and developing new discoveries and knowledge about the complex world and the systems that underlie it, the cosmos and all of human culture. And our job is to take all that science, all that knowledge, and bring it to the public, to interpret it, make it understandable and accessible, and to do that through education, and to do it through exhibition, and now increasingly to use all those media, digital channels of all kinds to share what we've got right here in New York City with the whole world.
Well, I remember that one of my heroes was Holden Catcher on the Rye, Salinger's great novel, and he admired the Museum of Natural History because of the permanence of its exhibitions. Was he right or was he wrong?
Oh, he was both right and wrong. I mean, it's one of the things I always, when I first came to the museum, people would say to me, and I love that section of Catcher in the Rye myself. But I will never forget when I came to the museum, people would say to me, a group of them would say, it's my favorite institution. Everybody would say that. But then there was one group that would say, don't change anything. And then there was another group that would say, well, you know, there are some things that could be updated. Well, of course, they're both right. Some things need to be kept and preserved and conserved in the way that we do very carefully. We've completely restored the 77th Street entrance, the castle side. We're doing the same thing on Central Park West, which was the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial created by the state for our president. And we're doing the same thing with the North American Mammal Hall dioramas, which are probably examples of the best dioramas in the world that still tell a great story, and actually we think of as probably the first virtual reality.
Now, a diorama is where I see a stuffed bear and behind a screen, a glass case.
But it's really a snapshot of an actual place, an actual scene, and if you go into the great North American Mammal Hall or into the Akeley Hall, which is equally famous, these are the greatest dioramas, what you're seeing is snapshots in time of specific locations and actual scenes. And one of the stories we tell now with computers that can be right nearby is what's happened to those locations, how the diversity of life has been threatened, how particular locations have been threatened, even destroyed, certain species become extinct. So these are still great tools. And I would say also that as exciting as the virtual is, there is nothing like the power of reality to inspire the imagination and a great passion and love for nature and the world around us.
The power of a stuffed animal. Do you have taxidermists on site?
You bet we have taxidermists. They're in the process now of completing the restoration of 37 dioramas in that North American Mammals Hall. Right now, it's going to reopen in the fall, along with a redone Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Hall.
I can't wait.
It's going to be fabulous.
You really can't talk about a museum without talking about the collection. So tell us about the collection. I mean, you have some hard objects like gemstones and fossils, and you also have some soft tissue objects.
You know, it's the most extraordinary range, and it's because the whole institution has a remarkable range. We cover in our scientific work and in our collections all the biological sciences, plus earth and planetary sciences, astrophysics, and the American Museum of Natural History is actually where modern anthropology was born, with Franz Boas and Mead. So in addition to all those dinosaur fossils that you mentioned and all those fantastic minerals and gems, we also have the phenomenal things that Margaret Mead brought back from the South Pacific, amazing baskets and other cultural indicators. And at the same time, as you mentioned, we are now doing new kinds of collecting. And so it's not
frozen tissues.
Frozen tissues.
Where
so
you can find DNA. Now, how do you freeze the tissues?
We have these giant vats, and they are kept cool with nitrogen, liquid nitrogen coolant. And we're going to be able to collect in the beginning about 1 million specimens. But what's interesting is today when you collect, you really don't have to shoot anything. Instead, you can just, if there was a whale swimming along, just scrape a little DNA, bring it back, pop it in the cool area and save it. And then you've got all the DNA and all the material, even things that we don't today know will be valuable.
So you have these nitrogen-cooled vats. You don't have any of the DNA in the refrigerator behind the bar in your office, do you?
I not only don't have the DNA, I don't have a bar.
You don't have a bar?
No.
Well, you should work on that.
I'm working on the bar before the other. No, I'm kidding.
Now, tell us about field trips. You really, you can't talk about science without talking about field trips. Do you have field trips?
Now, do you mean
like Indiana Jones?
Oh, yeah. You mean
out
expeditions. Yeah. Our scientists conduct about over 100 expeditions a year all over the world. And these are remarkable expeditions. We are sometimes working with other institutions, sometimes asked by other governments to come in and do a complete biodiversity survey, and sometimes asked to come in and help them set up a whole museum. It's a remarkably global, interconnected set of activities, and they inform everything that we're doing at the museum, because it moves from the field upstairs to where all the science is done at the museum and all the collections are kept, and their laboratories and very sophisticated scientific instrumentation at the same time, highly digital, given the name of your show. And then it moves into the labs.
We'll get to digital.
I know you will.
We're not going to talk about digital.
And then it gets into the laboratories where our scientists and our students are working, and from there it comes into exhibitions and education, and we share all this learning with the public.
Education, that's a marvelous word. Now, you have the only graduate school in a museum that awards a PhD, the only one in the world.
We have one of two in the world.
One of two in the world.
We're the only one in the Western Hemisphere, and certainly the only one in the United States.
And that's called the Richard Gilder Graduate School?
Correct, at the American Museum.
I know Dick Gilder. It's a wonderful thing he did for you.
He's an amazing
Tell
trustee.
what goes on there.
Well, we're giving out, we're not a comprehensive university and we don't aim to be. What we have is a PhD program, that's what we grant, in comparative biology, which is really what all of this science and the work of the museum is about, is understanding the relationship of living organisms, understanding the relationships of their complex ecosystems, and understanding the relationship of all of that to humanity, both in cultural terms and in terms of humanity's impact on other species and on other habitats. So that's what we're all about.
So that's where your students examine fish fossils that are millions of years old.
Correct. And you know, the graduate school is immensely attractive because it's probably the only one where you get to come, not only because it's in the museum, but think about those collections. Think about going out on an expedition as part of your thesis preparation. It's a unique experience.
Now, you teach in the museum at the Gilder School, but also you have outreach beyond the walls of the museum, don't you? I've heard about your Urban Advantage program. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, I think one of the biggest changes is, as you were alluding to it earlier, Jim, is how we're interpreting what it means to be an educational institution. And I think what really motivates us here is a couple of things. One, science is probably among the worst taught areas in our K through 12 education system. In fact, we have a crisis in this country in science education, and we rank dismally low, I think like 24th on the world surveys, sandwiched in between the Czech Republic and Hungary. Meanwhile, Shanghai ranks at the very top. And the implications of this for our country and for our people are very profound. First of all, in terms of workforce preparedness. And we know that even today, though we have terrible concerns, obviously, about unemployment, but there are lots of jobs that could be filled, but we don't have people who can fill them, who aren't properly trained. More and more jobs will have scientific basis and predicate to them. That doesn't mean everybody's going to be a rocket scientist, but they may well be working in hospitals. They may well be working in crime scenes and all kinds of places where these same instruments and this same understanding is going to be required. So workforce preparedness is critical. I would say for our country, global competitiveness. If we want to be as successful as we've been in the past, and we do, and our country's success has been heavily driven by science and innovation, and they're directly tied together. And the third is national security. And you know, all those specimens and all that work that goes on in the museum has enormous implications, we're learning, for understanding human health, including the pathogenicity, evolution, and spread of disease, which is very important for protecting against bioterrorism. So the implications of getting this right are huge, and we feel a commitment to helping make it better in our schools. The schools will be the main source of training in science, obviously, K through 12, but they can't do it all alone. And our science teachers have really not been trained in the scientific method. What does it mean to be a scientist? They typically don't see a real lab and sophisticated instrumentation or collections in a real fossil. They don't have the opportunity with their students to do the most important thing in educating them, which is awakening wonder and a sense of curiosity. So we're training science teachers, training about 4,000 science teachers a year on site and online. That's a long warm up to your Urban Advantage question, so very quickly. Urban Advantage is a program that we have organized. We've got 7 other science-rich cultural institutions around the city in it. It's tied to the 8th grade exit project, which is a state requirement. It's a science-based project for promotion. And we are training the teachers who work with the students, creating projects that allow the students to come into our institutions and do their work with us.
So you have the Science Expo where students come to the museum?
Well, that's
what's always interested me about science is it's not just reading and it's not just writing, but you do things. And so you make a project and kids come and they have a science project.
I'm signing you up. You have it just right.
Well, that's right. That's about as much science as I know.
But you had it because it is about inquiry-based and doing things. It's also about something else that I know you will understand because we all experience. It's about testing, trying an idea and seeing if it works. Failure often is the first thing that's before eureka. And so learning how to adjust your inquiry, learning how to think differently about a problem. These are great skills not only for a scientist, but for life. And so
well, it gets back to Theodore Roosevelt because he said failing is bad, but it's not so bad. The worst thing is not trying.
Well, he's absolutely right. Yeah. Theodore Roosevelt, though, really was a naturalist. He actually majored in biology, I believe, at Harvard. He really went to be a naturalist. And beyond that, when he was President of the United States, he actually wrote several scientific books during his time as president. Remarkable.
He was a remarkable man. But I promised you digital. Let's do digital.
I'm ready.
Tell us what, has the museum embraced the digital age? I mean, are you a Luddite, or you're out there with all these modern software and apps and devices and all these things that drive us crazy?
The museum has embraced it very enthusiastically, and not least because we are a scientific institution. And you know, in science, if you're not up to date or even ahead, you're behind. And digital is a critical piece of both our research, all kinds of instrumentation, very important for digital learning. Many of those 21st century skills that our students need, learning how to take a data set and visualize it are critical. So we do a lot of online learning, but we also have it all over the museum. In our exhibitions, and beyond that, Jim, we have Wi-Fi'd the entire public space of the museum. So, which
one
is
big hotspot.
It's a giant hotspot, but we also created a couple of apps. One of them I think is fascinating. It's called the Explorer. I'm pretending it's in my hand because it's a little handheld, and it's the first internal GPS. And in our museum, where one could perhaps get lost, it gives you turn-by-turn direction to everything, both to different galleries, but also, and it's rather important when you visit, to the men's or the ladies' room, to where you can get something to eat, and even to the shop if you'd like a memento of your visit. And then when you get into a gallery, we highlight different things that are shown in the gallery, different exhibits, and while you're there, you can use social media right on the same application and send it off to your friends.
Facebook, Twitter.
The whole thing.
The whole thing.
Right.
And I can't get lost in the museum.
Well, you probably still can. You've turned it off.
I might be mesmerized in front of the star sapphire, but I can't get lost.
Well, I'm definitely mesmerized in front of the star sapphire.
Now, you also have things like the Virtual Words Institute and the Digital Universe Flight School. I mean, tell about that. How does that work?
They're really fantastic learning devices. The Virtual Worlds Institute is an opportunity for middle school students, imagine this, to recreate in 3D ancient civilizations or ancient habitats, including species that may now be extinct, and to learn how to take the data, create these images, and then understand what happened to them, what might have gone right, what might have gone wrong. It's a phenomenal empowerment for students, but also a learning tool. The other one you mentioned is the Digital Flight School, where young people have the chance to come into our quite fantastic Hayden Planetarium in the Rose Center for Earth and Space. The Hayden Planetarium and the Space Theater are just about the largest virtual reality room in the world. So these students come in and they can work with something that's called the Digital Universe Atlas, which is a digital projection of the universe with perfect accuracy. And the youngsters find their favorite place in the universe, and they can recreate it, use the Hayden Planetarium controls, put it up on the dome, invite people in to see their own homemade space show. I mean, imagine being able to create your own space show.
That's marvelous. And now, let me ask you about your website, Ology. You have a website for kids.
That's not the whole website, but there is a website for kids and families.
Yeah, that's not the museum website. This is a separate website.
It's a component.
How
yeah.
old are the kids?
They probably from as young as 5 all the way up. I mean, it's remarkably, it's meant for children in the K area, you know, the K through 7 areas, K through 6, but it's got a lot of, it depends on the child and it depends on the family. And of course, when you start one place on the Ology website, as you get older, you might morph over into another place on the museum site for an adult or for a teenager, so it all is seamless, and I think that's exciting. In fact, we're getting ready to unveil a new updated version of our website this summer. It's going to have some very interesting features, but the Ology website is quite wonderful.
All these budding astronomers. Let me ask you also about your technology. You have a giant X-ray, a CT scanner.
Right.
That's so you can look at, say, an armadillo lizard and see the bones and see every part of it.
I think you're ready for the graduate school. You're sounding very good.
You think I could have a PhD?
I think you can have one.
No,
you have a JD.
I have a JD. If I get a PhD, I wanted to be more officially a doctor than I am.
There you go.
So tell me, what does the CT scanner do?
Well, there are a number of these devices now that are really critical for scientific research. One of them is the CT scanner, and that's like a super powerful X-ray machine. So you can take an absolutely beautiful picture of an entire species and get a view of it that you might never otherwise see. I should also say it will also be an incredibly beautiful view, and it's almost an artistic presentation. I think a lot of these things show the intersection between art and science. In fact, one of my pet theories is that actually, while I understand very well why C.P. Snow said that we have 2 cultures, we actually can't afford to have 2 cultures anymore. We have to have an understanding of how art and science come together.
Well, also myth and reality. I mean, look at the Goblin Spider, a subject of Japanese myth.
Right.
And your scanning electron microscopes. See, are they real goblin spiders?
There really are goblin spiders. But
and then you blow them up to enormous dimensions. How big is a real goblin spider?
About the size of what you imagine a spider. But the beauty of the SEM microscope is that you suddenly get to see it because it enlarges it hugely. You get an entirely different view of it. And actually, we're going to have a live spider exhibition opening in July this year. So.
Oh my God, that's scary.
Come see it.
It's scary as hell.
Oh, it's going to be fun. It's going to be really fun.
Do I bring the grandchildren?
Bring the grandchildren, and especially around Halloween, be fantastic.
Now you have some exhibitions like the giant squids where the museum goer touches the squid's tentacle under supervision. Are you going to allow them to touch the spider?
I think there will be some that you probably can touch with supervision. The with supervision is really important language.
Yeah, I see. So,
well said.
Well said. Well, that's quite fascinating. Now, what about your special exhibitions? What's going on with your special exhibitions now?
Well,
You've got this Creatures of Light, Nature's Bioluminescence.
Right. What we're trying to do with our special exhibitions, I think, is two things. One, we often try, we don't try to just put up a textbook and say, here's a science subject. What we do instead is we think about what are the really important issues of our time, more and more of which are scientifically based. Environmental, health. So we've had a number of shows about topics of human health, from infectious disease, for example, and genomics, but we also have done a number of exhibits about the environment, endangered species, climate change, water. This fall we're opening another show on the environment, but beyond, it's also a cultural show on food. And actually, climate change, water, and food, probably together, are the driving environmental topics. But to your point about the current show, which is the other thing we try to do with our special shows, is bring people things they might not otherwise see or imagine.
Ellen, on the subject of your special exhibitions, one of them intrigues me. They both intrigue me. You have two of them now. It's called Creatures of Light, Nature's Bioluminescence. We talked about it. What are you exhibiting there? You have glowing organisms of some kind? All
kinds of fantastic glowing things that people almost can't imagine. There's a crystal jellyfish, for example, and if you jostle it, if it is jostled in the water.
It's a live jellyfish.
Well, in the show it's not live, but nonetheless in life this is what happens. You'll see this represented though. It will actually have a beautiful, almost a necklace around its neck of lights that go on that we recreate rather magically. But
so I can make a jellyfish into a necklace.
You can make a jellyfish. Well, I can't, but maybe you can.
I'll tell my wife.
There you go, exactly. But it's a necklace on the jellyfish, and that's just a way of describing it. It's not literal. But there are all kinds of other creatures in there that are quite amazing. It's a beautiful, beautiful show. Very different.
Very different, I should say. I've always been interested in jellyfish, interested in avoiding them.
Well,
but now I'll come to the museum and see a virtual one.
Yeah.
But you also have a special exhibition beyond planet Earth.
Right.
That's the future of space exploration?
It's the future of space exploration. Of course, it comes up at a time when this is a big issue in our country, but you can see all kinds of remarkable
things. Newt Gingrich wanted to put men on Mars, and that would solve the economic problem.
He's very pro-science.
That's it.
But one of the things that you can see, there's a scale model of the Curiosity rover.
Which exists.
Which exists, and it's headed as we speak for Mars. I think it's going to land in August of this year, or at least slated to.
Will it find Orson Welles?
If it finds Orson Welles, it'll be really impressive. But it's going to find other things. It's going to find, or help find out, evidence of whether there was life beyond Earth.
Now, you have something which is one of your apps called Augmented Reality.
Right.
What is augmented reality?
Well, this is a fantastic application where you're in the show, and we have about 11 different or 12 different stations where if you hold up your iPhone or an iPad, you will get a representation of one of these icons. It might be the rover, it might be a moon base, it might be an asteroid or a spaceship, and you'll get information about it in depth. And then there's a little button you can push so you can collect that information and keep it, kind of create your own museum. All of these are ways of extending the visit. You know, we now have a very different relationship with our audience, whether they're on site or whether they're visiting us digitally. It's not a one-shot. They make comments back to us. We engage in a dialogue. They take what they've learned, they share it with their friends engage with us, and it just leads to a deepened relationship, a deeper understanding of what we're presenting. Both they have it and we have learned things from them, and I think that's a wonderful flow.
Well, and it's an active experience
Exactly.
for something that always used to be a passive experience.
Correct.
Where you'd move from exhibition to exhibition. Now, we started with Theodore Roosevelt. Let's end with Theodore Roosevelt. You're about to have a new exhibition about his work as a conservationist, isn't that right?
Theodore Roosevelt was our great conservation president. He founded the National Park System. He was a great naturalist as a young boy and throughout his entire adult life and his presidency. And actually, the Central Park West building, the major building on Central Park West of the museum, was founded by the state as the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial, and we are today restoring the facade, restoring the great Roosevelt Rotunda and the magnificent murals, and then there's the TR Memorial Hall, which we are redoing in its entirety almost, and we're going to really present the story not only of Teddy's life, which is fascinating unto itself, but really of his role in conservation. Conservation in America was actually born in many ways at the museum with Teddy Roosevelt, with our great curators, with others from all over the country that gathered and really began this movement that today is live.
Well, one of the inscriptions or quotations of Teddy Roosevelt on your rotunda is his saying, "You must have your feet on the ground and your head in the stars," and I think that's certainly applicable to you.
Thank you.
What would Teddy Roosevelt say about the museum today if he saw it?
Bully.
Bully. He would say bully. Thank you so much for
pleasure.
coming by. This has been just marvelous. And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week to learn more about the digital age. For the Digital Age, I'm Jim Zirin. Please visit our website at www.digitalage.org. Good night and all the best.